Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite hulls in all of EVE, the Sisters of EVE, STRATIOS. This is a really cool ship. I mean, just look at how this thing looks for starters. The sleek design on this, that kind of super sci-fi ring at the back of it. Not to mention as well, it is just an incredibly versatile ship that fulfills kind of all of my needs when playing the game. Now, for most players, the STRATIOS will fall into a strange niche where, because unless you're ticking every single one of those boxes, you'll probably do better with other ships that are a lot cheaper, but we'll talk about that a bit later on. Before we go any further on this one as well, I need to give a humongous thank you and a massive shout out to Arsden Krieg and his crew over at NGNL for both building and supplying this ship for me. That was a fantastic gift. It really meant the world to me, choked me up an awful lot actually, if I'm being completely honest about it. This is such a cool ship and thank you so much for sorting that out for me. As for the Orthrus, which they also built for me, I will be doing a video on that at some point in the near future as well. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about the STRATIOS, what it is, what it does, how you can use it, or more accurately I suppose, how I use it and how I choose to fly it, and maybe this will give you some inspiration if you've been sitting on the fence about the STRATIOS to answer that question of is it worth it, or is something else going to fill that role better for you? Now, if you do enjoy this video and find it useful, please let me know by hitting like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes if you haven't already, and ding that notification bell to make sure you never miss an update. Finally, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel and keep me doing what I do, I have a Redbubble merchandise store and a Patreon page that you can pledge to support at as well. Details of all of that is in the description down below. All that said and done then, let's jump right into talking about the Sisters of EVE, STRATIOS. The Servant Sisters of EVE are one of the 5 non-pirate factions, so if you come into the ship tree and the select faction screen, you'll find the Servant Sisters of EVE in the middle of the left-hand side. If we tap on that, it'll bring us through to their ship tree, which is the Astero for their frigate, the STRATIOS for their cruiser, and the Nesta as their battleship. Now, the Servant Sisters of EVE are essentially a humanitarian organisation within New Eden. They exist solely to benefit humanity, essentially. Ultimately, on one hand, you have a group of them who are doing research into the EVE Gate and trying to figure out how it collapsed and using the technology of it to perhaps reopen it or to figure out what's going on with the universe. They do all kinds of stuff like operating rescue missions, including in pirate space. In fact, if you fancy a book to read, I can wholeheartedly recommend you read The Burning Life, which is set in the EVE universe, and it follows a crew of Sisters of EVE agents as they go through the various different pirate factions, so you'll learn a lot more about, say, the Angel Cartel, the Gurustus Pirates, the Sanchez Nation, all this kind of thing, and the Blood Raiders, as you go through and follow their sort of their efforts as they try to save people from all kinds of various disasters. Essentially, think of what the British Red Cross are supposed to be, coupled with sort of a research agency as well, and that's the Sisters of EVE. Anyway, let's have a look then at the STRATIOS itself. Again, I don't want to spend hours waxing lyrical on this because believe me, I could. In my opinion, this is probably one of the best looking ships in the entirety of EVE. I just love that sort of sci-fi-esque ring to the back of it, that full-on hard-body cruiser at the front there, even just the colour scheme, that white and blood red detailing is really, really cool. And with the nanocore I've got giving me that kind of little blue glow to it as well. You can't see it here, but you can see it in the intro. It's just such a pretty ship and I love it so very much. I am hoping we get a few more skins for it at some point in the future though, because if I'm being completely frank, none of the nanocore skins really do it for me here on the STRATIOS. Probably the Tungsten Age is the closest, and even then, you see I've taken a nanocore but I run with the basic setup. Anyway, talking about setup, let's have a look at the attributes and fittings profile here for the STRATIOS. First of all, it is a drone cruiser, as you can tell by the fact that it has 4 drone launching tubes. These can launch small and medium drones, so be prepared to have 4 of those fitted. We then have 3 high slots, 4 mid slots, and 4 low slots, along with the standard output here of 3 combat and 3 engineering rigs. Now, the 3 high slots is a bit of a strange one here. If you're familiar with the STRATIOS from EVE Online, then obviously those high slots used to be taken up by things like the Core Probe scanner launcher and the actual Covert Ops cloaking device itself, maybe even interdiction nullifiers and stuff like that there in the high slot. Now, obviously, the scanners are now mid slots and Covert Ops cloaks are low slots, which frees up the high slots here in EVE Echoes to give weaponry to the STRATIOS, which is really unusual for me as someone who has flown these in EVE Online quite a bit. It's kind of nice, though. I like that difference, if I'm being completely honest. The 4 mid-slots, of course, are mainly going to depend on what kind of activity you're doing. If you're going exploring and thus looking for like relic and data sites, then you're going to need to use up 3 of those mid-slots already just on your scanner and analyzer setup. Then the 4th mid-slot gives you a little bit of versatility as to what you'd want to do from there. Same, obviously, if you go for PvE or indeed PvP combat, then you'd mix and match accordingly for those. 4 low slots means that the STRATIOS is not particularly tanky. There's not a lot of versatility there. In those low slots, you're probably going to have at least one of those being a Covert Ops cloak, which kind of leaves you with 3 slots left for things like tank, weapon upgrades, and propulsion modules. We'll talk more about that in the fitting section, but be aware that the STRATIOS is, of course, like most of the Covert Ops cruisers, it's kind of on the sort of the less tanky side of things, and you can see this here by looking at the defense stat as well. 23,367 as standard, the vast majority of which is in structure and armor, about 6,700 in each of those, with only 5,821 in the shields. Now look, that's not a small shield by any means. There's still a lot of HP there that someone is going to have to chew through before they start damaging your armor and structure, but obviously this is the kind of ship you're more likely to armor tank than you are to shield tank, and maybe one day we'll get structure tanking as well for a bait STRATIOS, but until that day comes, yeah, armor tanking is probably the way forward. Its cargo hold capacity also isn't terrible. You're looking at 1100 cubic meters, which for a cruiser is about middling, and we do get bonuses to that later on, so if you're using this for exploration and grabbing loot around, it is a pretty good option for that, you know, let's not lie about that. And the power grid output as well, 820 megawatts, is pretty solid and does give us some space, especially since we're a drone ship for the most part, does give us some space to oversize some of our modules. As we come a little bit further down though, considering continuing the electrical theme, our capacitors just are not as good as the power grid though. 2,844 gigajoules with a capacitor recharge rate of less than 12 gigajoules per second, like 11.97, just leaves a little bit to be desired. Even if you're armor tanking this, capacitor stability is not necessarily something you're going to achieve here, but it doesn't really need to be, because that's not what the STRATIOS is aimed at doing. It's a Covert Ops vessel, it is designed for burst action and then just return to cloaking. And on that front, its signature radius of 104.1 is fairly low. The scan resolution, however, leaves a lot to be desired for me. Being under 300 meters on a cruiser means it's not overly great, and even though it gets bonuses to this later on, they still don't take it quite to where I would expect the STRATIOS to be, considering that this is a sort of a research and exploration vessel. Scanning is what this thing does. It really does need to have a considerably higher scan resolution than this, I feel. With the bonuses it gets from the skills, I genuinely feel this should be coming closer to sort of the 600, 700 meter mark, but hey, maybe that's just me and some other people might find that ridiculously OP and broken. Just my 2 cents. For the flight velocity and agility as well, flight velocity of 202 meters per second is a little bit sort of slower to middling. The warp speed as well is on the slower side, curiously, 3.0 AU per second. A lot of cruisers go to 3.5 or even 4 AU per second. The mass and inertia, however, are pretty nice, and that does make it surprisingly nimble. It's quick to align, which helps when you're running Gatecamps or just trying to move through enemy territory. Moving into the trait description though, the role bonuses here, let's talk about these first because this is what makes the STRATIOS such a unique ship. Of course, it has the ability to fit Covert Ops cloaking devices. That means you can fit a cloaking device that will stay cloaked when you warp, and that is really useful when you're moving through enemy territory and you're worried about Gatecamps, as I'll showcase later on in this video. We then have some cloaking bonuses here, a 100% reduction to the lock delay for a cloaking device, which means when you drop the cloak, you can instantly start locking on. It's normally, I think, it's like around about 10 seconds. Sorry, I fly so many ships that have this lock delay reduction that I forget what the actual lock delay now is, but this has no lock delay. You can drop the cloak and immediately start locking on. We then have a 50% reduction to the cloaking device reactivation delay. That one I do know, that's normally 20 seconds. 20 seconds locked reactivation delay means if you drop your cloak because something gets within 2 kilometers of you, or you decide to drop cloak to shoot at something or lock something, for example, it is then 10 seconds in the case of the Stratios before you can put that cloak back on. Finally then, we have a 25% increase to analyzer success rate, and this is a little bit misleading. If you were to have a look at the analyzers for the Relic and data analyzers, and then have a look at the fact that you can take these up to some pretty high levels using the hacking skill, even at Expert 5 hacking, with this 25% increase to analyzer success rate, you can still fail to open caches. Because of how the math works, this is not a complete 100%. Believe me, I have the 555 and things still fail from time to time. It does mean that you're much less likely to actually, if you've trained into the skills properly, you're much less likely to fail at something enough times for it to explode and be destroyed, but it doesn't give you a full 100% guarantee, which feels weird with a ship like the Stratios that is so heavily designed and based on this. Again, maybe that is due to the fact that ultimately one day we'll get the hacking minigame and that will then be a different roll bonus there, but who knows. For the time being though, it's a useful bonus for sure. Very nice to have, and does mean that if you find a site, you're almost guaranteed to actually be able to get those boxes open. Looking at the skills though, Advanced Space Exploration Technology gives us a 5% increase to cargo hold capacity, 25% additional cargo hold on top of the 1100 that we already have built in, does mean that the Stratios gets a larger cargo hold than the Explorer frigates, other than I think the Imicus Explorer. The Imicus Explorer, I think, still just pulls out ahead of the Stratios in terms of cargo hold size. We then have a 5% increase to scan resolution, 25% at full training. Again, even though we've got about 300 meters scan resolution, by the time you put the 25% on top of that, you're only looking at 375, which for a cruiser is okay, but I really feel that the Stratios, as a cruiser that is designed for scanning, shouldn't be okay. It should be good. We should be looking at something that is in the 500 to 600 meter region here for scan resolution by time that bonus is on there, but again, maybe that's just me. Finally then, from the Advanced Space Exploration Technology bonuses, a 7.5% reduction to both the Resonance Simulator scan radius and minimum scan radius. Now, if you're not sure what those mean, I do have a video on how wide resonance scanning works and how narrow resonance scanning works. The sort of TLDR of that, though, is that obviously the smaller your minimum scan radius, the more sites and ships you are going to be able to scan down. You're going to meet the minimum requirements of scanning those. And the scan radius, the one that's not minimum scan radius, is to do with using the red scanners, the narrow resonance scanners, for scanning down enemy ships and whether or not they get notified. Having a smaller scan radius means you are less likely to notify the target ship. If your scan radius is smaller than their source radius, they will not be notified. Finally then, we have Advanced Cruiser Command. This gives us bonuses to our drone damage, 30% per level, 150%, plus 150% at full training, which means those 4 drones actually act as if they were 10 medium drones, which is a pretty good damage output. The armor resistance of 4% per level here is 20% at full training, and drone command range of plus 3 kilometers per level is of course an additional 15 kilometers of drone command range, allowing the Stratios to engage in combat from just that little bit further out. If you're training up into drone skills, I think if you're an expert drone, that goes out to a maximum 45 kilometers, assuming you're not rigging for things. That gives us a fairly versatile ship. Clearly bonuses to covert ops and scanning, but actually not terrible at getting into fights either, and that's why I personally like the Stratios. So let's talk about how to fit this. I mentioned earlier that STRATIOS is a bit of a mixed bag, and ultimately, I think it's important to note that this is a very expensive ship, like a very expensive ship compared to some of its compatriots. So you might find that if you're only looking for certain things that the STRATIOS can do, there are other ships out there that will probably do it better. If you're looking for a cruiser, a drone cruiser that has covert ops capability, for example, then the Arbitrator 3 covert ops is probably going to be a much better ship for you. I think it actually ends up with better survivability stats in regards to its signature radius and its basic speeds. It gets better DPS across the board than the STRATIOS does, and it is significantly cheaper. So for a PvP combat covert ops vessel, you have that, and of course the Arbitrator covert ops line as well can also drop sinusoidal fields, which the STRATIOS cannot. Obviously, the Arbitrators do not have bonuses to scanning and exploration, so if you wanted to then do scanning and exploration, you can also look into things like the exploration frigates, the Probe Explorer, Magnet Explorer, Imicus Explorer, and Heron Explorer. Again, ultimately, even having a fully kitted out Arbitrator 3 covert ops and then your choice of the Explorer frigates fully kitted out is going to still probably be about half the price of a fitted STRATIOS, just as a concept of how expensive this can be. And those Explorer frigates are faster, more nimble, cheaper, still get the scanning bonuses, still get the Relic and Data Analyzer bonuses, and actually have a bigger cargo hold, believe it or not. The Probe, Heron, and Magnet start at 1500 cubic meters with a plus 25% bonus. The Imicus then also has that 1500 cubic meter cargo hold, but it gets a plus 50% bonus to that on top. So it is a significantly larger cargo hold if you wanted to be using those. The way the STRATIOS shines, however, is if you don't want to have to go back and swap and dock and change and all that kind of thing. For example, if I wanted to go and do combat with the Arbitrator 3 covert op and then decide I want to go exploring, I'd need to fly back to my station, swap over to the Astero or the Probe or whatever like that, go off, do that, then come back and swap and swap and swap. Whereas with the STRATIOS, I can do all of those things to a good degree using just the fit that I have and a couple of other modules in the cargo hold. So let's talk about that. Now, the basic fit that you're seeing here is my sort of what I refer to as the mobile fit. This is for when I'm moving around, going from A to B, so very useful for when I'm exploring or even if I'm just getting to where I want to go. The main purposes of this comes in these low slots. We of course have the Covert Ops cloaking device, pretty much a mainstay of the STRATIOS, and you'll notice here, no penalties anymore to this. We've got that 10-second reactivation delay, there is no locking delay, and there is no reduction to scan resolution anymore from Covert Ops cloaking devices. That was removed during the April balance update. Combine this with a micro warp drive and an inertial stabilizer, and we have a great ship for getting through hostile space here. You land near a gate camp whilst you're cloaked, and remember the covert ops cloaks can warp while cloaked, so you land in that bubble with a cloak on. You can then navigate through to safety with that. If you come in on the other side, if you've just jumped a gate, and as you come through the gate you find yourself inside an interdictor sphere, you can quickly double tap in space, then immediately tap the micro warp drive, the inertial stabilizer, and the covert ops cloak. And what that will do is activate the micro warp drive and the inertial stabilizer, thus reducing your inertia by a significant amount. I think that works out to like 45% reduction to your inertia, whilst the micro warp drive activates. So that micro warp drive very quickly gets you to maximum speed. You change your heading nice and quickly, you're at maximum speed with the micro warp drive. The cloak then comes on to stop you being targeted as you come out of the gate cloak into the standard cloak. And then you can drift out of the bubble at a good speed there. Obviously the micro warp drive won't get its second activation because it'll tell you that's failed because you're cloaked, but as long as you activate the micro warp drive just before you activate the cloak, you'll get that one activation as the cloak clicks in. Very useful for running gate camps. Now then, because I'm going to be exploring, my mid-slots are of course a wide-range resonance scanner, this kind, the Explorer, along with Data Analyzer and Relic Analyzer, the Meta Level 8 versions, because I want to be able to go everywhere I can, and therefore I need that analysis strength of 4. There's nothing worse than spending a couple of hours searching for a relic or data site, finally finding one, only to discover that 2 or 3 of the boxes you just can't open because you don't have the minimum analysis strength, right? Now you'll notice that if I go back to the Resonance Wave Simulator here, I only have a minimum scan radius of 75.9. And you might be thinking, hang on, I'm sure you mentioned in your Catskull Academy video on scanning that the smallest sites actually drop all the way to 75, so you won't be able to scan the highest sites, right? And that's correct, and I could rig for that final 0.9 meter. However, I am currently training into space exploration technology Expert 5, which will push me below that anyway. So obviously rig to get to 75 meters if you're going to be scanning in nullsec. For the most part, I'm not really going in deep into nullsec with this just yet, so I'm quite happy with that 75.9, and if you see the rigs later, you'll understand why I don't want to swap out temporarily. 75.9 will find all of the high-sec, low-sec, and most of the nullsec sites, so when I'm in sort of Empire space and the borders of nullsec, it's absolutely fine for my needs there in regards to scanning. I've then got a Predator Stasis Webifier as the 4th slot. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. High slots, I've gone for Pitham C-type medium missile launchers. You could go for Rapids here, because Rapids, of course, are going to be better against frigates, but because I do PvE with this, yes, really, I'll talk about that in a second, I tend to go for the mediums here. They apply well enough to the interceptors and faster frigates that I'll find when scanning that I can bully them out of the sight. You'll notice I don't have any points here, though. The point is that if I'm in an exploration site and a frigate turns up, or there's one already in there, something like a probe explorer or a slasher interceptor or something like that that's been scanning, then merely just me arriving on grid, holding them, hitting them with the missile launchers and my drones going crazy at them is usually enough for them to fly away. I'm not aiming for a kill. Kill's nice if I can get one, and quite frequently you can, just because of the amount of DPS you can kick out in a very small period of time, but for the most part, this is more than adequate just to bully someone out of a site or to defend a site that I'm already in. If things get a little bit hot, well, I can jump out of there in various different ways, as we'll see in a moment. The final low slot then is a large armor repairer, and you may have heard me mention in previous videos as well that one large armor repairer is not as good as two medium armor repairers. In fact, if you compare two medium armor repairers to one large armor repairer, the large has a larger amount of power grid requirement, uses more capacitor, and has a lower overall armor repair value compared to the two mediums. But obviously I've only got one slot left and I've got more than enough power grid, so I may as well jam this one in there and just be careful of how I use it in regards to my capacitor. It's pretty useful for just getting me out of a tight situation when I need to. You might find that you could put a damage control unit in there, or something just in case you do get caught and want to try and absorb a couple of hits whilst you power off to safety, but for the most part I tend to find that's not an issue for me. And if I move into the rigs, you'll kind of see why. Because if I look at the engineering rigs, oh, would you look at that? 3 Warp Core Optimizer 3s. And you might be thinking, hang on, Benzie, you talk about how the Warp Core Optimizers, it's way too balanced against like being able to pin a ship down, yet you're flying this with 3 of those. Yes, because I'm not looking at getting into combat. I'm not trying to get into combat and then running off because, oops, I done goofed. I don't want to get into combat to begin with, so having -9 stability there is really useful. It means that if I'm outside of an interdictor sphere, I'm pretty much okay to warp away, which allows me that possibility of, oops, I tried to shoot something to get it out of my relic site or data site, and then his friends showed up, I can turn around and jackrabbit out of there. On the other side of things, I've gone for a drone firepower augmenter and a drone speed augmenter for a bit more DPS, followed by an anti-explosive pump, because I tend to go ratting in Caldari space with this thing. Ultimately, that just reduces the damage that those missiles do, but you could easily go for larger armor tank overall, or more repair per cycle of the armor repairer is another one you could go for there. And those would both be valid options. If you're fitting this thing primarily for PvP, if you actively want to go hunting with it, I do actually recommend swapping all of these combat rigs to tanking rigs. Go full armor tank on this thing and help it survive. You'll find that your drone damage adds up over time. The application is good enough. You just want to survive, and thus having the tank is a better option. And if you're going for PvP, then obviously you swap the blue scanner for a red scanner, and the relic and data analyzers probably get swapped out either for a web and a point, or in my case, I usually would run 2 points on this, 2 Caldari Navy long points, just to be able to hold something in position whilst my drones rip it apart. And that's what I did, if you paid attention, in the video where I showed me flying the Stratios in the recent Verge of Silence event. 2 points was more than enough to hold most ships in position, while my drones ripped them apart and my missiles did the damage they needed to, and it worked really quite well. In PvP though, and indeed any form of combat, my low slots do get jigged around a bit here. Now the downside of an inertial stabilizer is that 20% increase to signature radius. Doesn't really help us in combat, being able to have the inertial stabilizer there, and that signature radius penalty does hurt, so I tend to swap out for a drone damage amplifier. I've only got a Federation Navy on hand, but you could obviously go for a Nest Worm, it'll still fit in that power grid slot there as you can see, and that gives us a little bit of extra survivability by reducing our signature radius back down to natural size, whilst also increasing our DPS output. So what you're looking at now is essentially what I tend to use if I've decided that I'm done with exploring for the day and I want to just jump and do some Hisec Encounters. I usually run the Tech 8 Encounters in the Stratios. It's a good way of getting it's only 3 million an hour, but it also clears the Concord Pass stuff for me. Whereas obviously exploration doesn't clear any of the Concord Pass missions, which sucks. And it means I just don't have to run all the way back into nullsec, dock up, and then swap to a combat vessel in order to do my Concord Pass. I can just grind out some cheap anomalies, earn a little bit of ISK that way, blow some ships up and do the Concord Pass. Usually on there, do so many encounters and blow up so many NPC ships. Those are the ones I tend to go for. Otherwise, if I am going exploring, I'll swap one of those missions for the stay online for 15 and 30 minutes, just so I get those while exploring. But yeah. And that's basically the setup. That's the fits that I run. So for me, the most part, all I do is swap in the inertial stabilizer and the drone damage amplifier, depending on whether I'm being mobile and exploring, or whether I'm gonna dock up and then swap to the drone damage amplifier and do some ratting anomalies. And if I decide that I want to go for PvP, well, it's usually cheap enough for me to just buy a couple of the long points off the market, leave the analyzers safely in a hangar somewhere because those things are expensive, and then just have some fun with it. As for the nanocore, well, nanocore is kind of up to you. You can go for drone damage, you can go for tank, you can go flight velocity. Whatever you fancy really on the Stratios is kind of up to you. Now, I did promise earlier that I was going to showcase some footage in regards to running Gatecamps, so let's showcase that now. Here I had just jumped out of Conora into Enrail in my Estero. I was coming back to pick up the Stratios for this, and I found myself in a gate camp and thought, what an excellent opportunity to record. So the first thing you saw me do was zoom my camera out and find where the smallest distance between me and the edge of the bubble is, and instantly I double tap and straight away hit that cloak. I then open up my my chat here, and I go to Scout under Inform to let everyone in my alliance know that there is indeed a gate camp here at Enrail, just in case anyone was considering coming this way. So there's my little notification, just to let people know that this gate is camped and be aware of that. You can see I'm quite comfortably drifting towards the edge of the bubble. Takes me a little bit of time here, just to go through and let them know that it's a Rupture Interdictor, a Revelation Dreadnought, and a Tempest Striker sitting on the gate, just in case anyone then wants to come along and clear that. Not quite out of the gate yet. You can see I don't have the Micro Warp Drive here equipped. I didn't do the Micro Warp Drive trick, but it's good enough for me to slowly come towards the edge of the gate here, edge of that gate camp, sorry, edge of that bubble. And once I'm happily clear of that bubble, not quite yet, so we're going to wait a few moments. And there we are now clear of the bubble, but that doesn't mean I should immediately warp to safety, because the worst thing that could happen right now is that I hit warp and then find myself, sort of accelerating towards my minimum warp speed and hitting the edge of the bubble again. So you'll see I turn my camera around and I'm looking to make sure I'm well and truly clear. I will then check the gate and find where that actually is in comparison to my current position. So I'm going to go through to Stargate, approach it here just to get a facing and an idea of exactly where that is. And I can use that alignment quickly to see, no, I'm not going to click the side of the bubble, so I can happily now warp to that point. And I should really warp at distance, just in case there is another bubble camp on that gate there. For some reason though, I just tap and I warp, and I get away with it this time. There's no one else on that gate on the other side, but that is how you jump a gate camp whilst you are inside it. But what about the other way around? So this time around, I've just landed back in Enrail with a beautiful comet there to welcome me, and I'm heading towards Conora. Now, it's only been about 20-30 minutes since I passed through that gate camp before, I am assuming it's still going to be here, and sure enough I can still see greys in local. So what I'm going to do now is to make sure that I warp in at a distance. If, like me, you have a system like Enrail that is often camped near where you are, it does make sense to add some new bookmarks above and behind those gates so that you can jump to those and actually observe the situation from a safe distance. Very useful as well if you're not in a covert ops ship, because you can warp to there and see, was this gate one of the ones that was camped? And if it's not, you can easily turn around. Well, if it's not camped, you can easily jump through that gate. If it is camped, you can turn around and walk back to safety nice and easily. Now here you can see I'm arriving on that Conora gate. The guys are still here, the bubble is still there. I whack into the side of the bubble, but because I've got a covert ops cloak on, they have no idea that I'm here. First thing I do is look around just to check for wreckage. Last thing you want to do is try and run a gate camp only to fly within 2 kilometers of some other poor sod's wreckage, decloak, and get locked and blapped by whoever's running the camp. That's just not fun. It's hilarious, but it's not fun. You'll see that I'm double tap as well down into the distance here because I want to go under the gate. I don't want to fly straight at them just in case something spawns and then ultimately decloaks me. If I'm really close to them and I've got sort of a low angular velocity to them, that's a bad situation for me. So I'm kind of trying to come in at an angle here, and at this point, whilst things are nice and safe, I'm going to quickly open up Alliance chat, go to the new Inform tab, and give a warning. Ultimately, just to let people know this gate camp is still here, and you can see there, Rupture Interdictor and a Revelation are both there. So it's the Cruiser and a Dreadnought, and I can just say it's a Benzie gate camp. We know these guys, they camp this quite frequently. People know what kind of stuff to expect now, whether they want to come and pop it, or whether they're just going to leave it and let other people know. Another thing I like to do when I hit a gate camp like this is actually say hi to people. Just give a little bit of a salute and let them know what I'm flying. Yes, it's a little bit cocky, but I've yet to be caught in a gate camp, touch wood. So far, it's just my way of saying, hey guys, I see what you're doing, good luck trying to get me. And I do usually wish them good luck, in fairness. Here I am now, 15 kilometers off the gate. I feel quite confident here. Even if something locked me, that with my even if something decloaked me, with my micro warp drive, I should be able to reach that gate in no time at all, nice and easily. We're now at 12 kilometers away, so fingers crossed I can make it through. And of course I'm recording this and playing it back, so of course I make it through, but there we go. I do this a lot with like the Astero, the Explorer frigates, the Stratios, my Bellicose Covert Ops, my Arbitrator Covert Ops, recently the Blackbird Covert Ops. I'll have a video on that one soon enough as well. I'm actually weirded out by that one. Interesting ship, but that's another topic for another day. And even the Wreath 2, I tend to fly around with a full hold just in case I find a gate camp and someone can get me. But here we are, I stop at the 5 kilometers because I've got an approach set to 5, my cloak drops, and through I go. Anyway folks, that's all for today's video. The Stratios, as I say, is a very niche ship. Most folks are going to get on better using multiple other ships that would fulfill the same role, but let me know if you're a Stratios pilot. Otherwise folks, happy sailing, thank you for watching right the way to the end, and see you in New Eden.